Well, Ralph, thank you so much for being here, visiting us here at California Baptist University in the Office of Student Success. My name is Tae Sung, and I'm the Dean of Student Success here. Would you just take a moment to introduce yourself for our audience, please?
Thank you. I'm Ralph Winter. I produce movies, and I work currently at Sphere Studios, producing content for the Vegas venue we have there.
Fantastic. Well, we look forward to hearing more about that in just a bit, but I want to begin our conversation with some things that I've been thinking about. I often tell my students, I have this line I repeat in almost all my classes: you are your story, right? And if we were to bonk you upside the head and you lost your memory and lost the ability to tell your story, you would probably experience something like an identity crisis. And whenever I tell young people this idea about how storytelling is so important to their identity, that their sense of calling, purpose in life, I get that students struggle with this a little bit. And one of the things that I think I'm coming around to realizing is part of their problem is that they haven't heard enough good stories to help frame and build their own story about their lives. And I think there is a little bit of a crisis of imagination maybe in our culture. People struggling to figure out, well, what's the story I want to tell? And everybody thinks they need to invent their own story rather than see themselves as perhaps part of a bigger story. And today, what we want to do is hear your story a bit. And I think it's going to do a lot to really inspire our young people, whether they want to go into the industry or not.
Right.
Whatever they do, I think hearing a life well lived, right? A story that is worth telling, people will begin to insert themselves and say, oh, I like that plot twist there, or I've experienced something similar, and that's the way I should be thinking about those aspects of my story. So today, we're excited about hearing your story.
Great.
And we're going to be focusing on 3 C's today in our conversation, right? We're going to talk a little bit about your story as it relates to your professional career. And then we want to take it all the way back to your college days to think a little bit about how college shaped your story and your formation. And then we want to end our conversation just trying to even help our students discern what a calling is. What does that even mean?
Right.
So I wonder if you'd start off by telling us, what do you do and how did you get into that industry?
So I got started, let's talk about what I do. What I do is produce movies, and now I'm working for a company where I'm doing that inside of a company as an executive. But producing movies and television has become a career. It didn't start out that way.
Okay.
Out of college, I got a job, in training for a department store, and I was biding my time until my wife finished nursing school. Then we'd switch. I'd go back to graduate school or seminary. Not really sure what the plan was.
And departments were like a Macy's or something like that?
Broadway department stores, now gone, but like Macy's.
Yeah.
And it was about training, and they had a new tool called videotape to use for training. So I, stepped forward to sort of volunteer to do that. And I had done, plays and musicals and stuff at church and in high school. So I was comfortable in front of a group. I was comfortable helping to produce things, and so it was kind of fun. And I made probably 50 5-minute little pieces: how to greet customers, how to take inventory, how to just various little things for what an employee would want to do.
Would you act in these films yourself, or?
Thankfully, I did not.
Okay. So recruited co-workers to be in the video and these types of things.
Family members and things like that. I did some stuff on employee benefits that got me in trouble because I wanted to visualize and I wanted to tell a story about it. So instead of an employee benefits video that's normally a big talking head and charts and graphs and about engulf and devour and you and all that, this was more of 2 people in a bank, and they walk when they used to deposit your check in the bank, and they're in line, and the guy behind the older woman sees her scratch. She's got a piece of paper. She's got a piece of paper, and she's got the check stub, and she's, and he taps her on the shoulder, and she says, he says, "Do you work at the Broadway? Because the check." She goes, "No, I don't." And they step forward in the line, and he says, "Where I work at the Broadway, I get 15% off of everything I buy as an employee."
Yeah.
And he takes the check out of her hand and he rips off 15% and hands it back to her. And they go through the line, he keeps talking about the benefits
Yes.
of working at the Broadway till she's finally tearing up the paycheck and walks off into the distance.
Yeah.
And gee, can I get a job at the Broadway? So the personnel didn't like it. You spent $5,000 of our money making a video about employees that tear up their paychecks. And I go, actually, here's the research I did. It got the point across, and they were like, okay, don't ever do that again. Whatever. So
You were ahead of your time.
I don't know. I was an irritant. So I left there. I got a job at Broadway. From Broadway, I left and went to Paramount Pictures, and I got a job in post-production. And then I was kind of in right time, right place, leveraged my position, and got to be a producer, worked on the Star Trek movies, et cetera, et cetera. So the job is really about marshaling, leading a team, and taking them across the finish line.
Yeah.
Someone has to do that. Someone has to be the leader. Someone has to take the flag or the ball or whatever analogy and put it across the goal line.
Yeah.
And that person is the producer.
I see.
That's why at the Oscars, the best picture is awarded to the producer. Because that person or persons are the ones who take the ball across the goal line.
Yeah.
And that's fun. I like that.
Yeah.
It's fun in that position. I like doing that. I think I've got some skill in doing that, and so it's been rewarding to do that.
I'm sure you got a lot of great stories about even that experience and taking what it takes to take the ball across the finish line, and all the contingencies and things that could go wrong in the process.
Oh yeah.
And in that sense, it really sounds like a job where skills that you need. I mean, how different is that from other industry jobs like project developers, project managers? Very similar, right?
Real estate developers.
Sure.
Very similar.
Sure. People in every industry, there's always somebody who needs to take full responsibility from A to Z and see that all the way through it.
People crave leadership, and I think there's lots of people that just, they're Teflon, man. They don't want anything to stick, and they don't want that responsibility. So there's a few people that will step up and take it and deliver. And I think when you can do that, you'll be successful. Matter of fact, I think that if you simply do what you say you're going to do, you stand out from the crowd. Because most people don't.
Very good.
They can't follow through.
When students, let's say a student say that they want to go into that industry, what are some of the other types of career paths, right? Other than, the traditional actor, director, film writer, right? What are the
lots
potential
of roles.
jobs?
There's roles, there's the agencies that put packages together. You can work for an agency. You could work at a studio or a streamer, and they're also packaging and trying to figure out what does an audience want? How do we put that in the best shape that is good for our platform? And then behind the camera, there's lots of roles that are, working class roles of grips and electricians, costume, hair, makeup, very rewarding careers that can happen on $2 million movies and $200 million movies. And in Los Angeles, it's more television in Los Angeles these days, but there's plenty of work to do that. And when the industry's bustling, we're still recovering at the moment. But there's work around the world for that, and the movies are made around the world. There's lots of cultures that are making movies, and I've been to most of those countries, and the top 3 countries in the world that make movies: China, India, and Nigeria. Nigeria, Nollywood has a thriving business. I didn't say the movies are necessarily that good, but they make a lot of them. And there's a lot of work and a lot of people that want to tell stories. So it's a worldwide business.
Do you get the sense that a lot of people live in Los Angeles and travel to these locations, or you can be rooted in any one of these locations and have a viable career?
I think you can be anywhere and have that career.
Yeah.
I don't think you have to live in Los Angeles. Now, it just tends that a lot of decisions get made here about content from the content companies, but production is spread out all over the world. The incentives for movies in particular are mostly outside of Los Angeles and California. So, but if you live in Michigan, you can find a way to make it a thriving career and do something. You may not be making movies for Paramount Pictures, but you can tell stories. There's industries, there's, everybody needs skilled people with telling stories and using video to do that. There's lots of opportunity.
Very good. One of the things that we often hear when industry professionals and people who are successful, when they tell their stories about their career, it often begins after college, right? You started working in a department store and then got a job at Paramount and then had this wonderful long career. One of the questions I have is to ask about what Ralph Winter was like in college and how those years as a college student, we're trying to prepare this conversation for our own college students here who are in the middle of trying to figure out who they want to be, what they want to do in life, who they're going to fall in love with, and a lot of students who are trying to figure out what that looks like, and sometimes they don't quite even know what the end goal is. But what we want to think about how college can serve as a formative time to prepare people to discover whether it's their career or calling in these things. Can you tell us a little bit about how your success in your industry can be traced back to your college formation?
I think, I majored in math, computer science, but graduated in history.
Okay.
Because I always had that sort of foundation of stories and history and, the interest and fascination about that. I always wanted to play basketball, and so I played in high school and college, tried to be a walk-on at UC Berkeley where I went, and I was too short. At 6'4", I'm just not big enough in the NCAA. But it was fun. I was also rebellious. I used to have hair. I used to have a lot of hair. And it sort of pissed off my dad, and that strained relationship, that was a reason to go away to Berkeley and all of that. I got drafted, but I was a conscientious objector because I had grown up in the church and my buddies around me wrestling with all these issues felt like the system was broken and we were being lied to. And so that fit in well with Berkeley. I spent a summer in Mississippi working with John Perkins. And my girlfriend then, now my wife, we spent that summer teaching, playing basketball, and just experiencing firsthand the racial discrimination that, in a small way we experienced what's been going on in this country for so long. And that helped shape and form what I think about, how I treat people, and then sort of that cauldron of all that stuff. I was living with a pastor and working in a church, playing basketball, but going to the Black Student Union for classes, and I didn't do any protesting. It was too cold when I was there. Rocks are too hard to throw when your jacket's on. But it was a wild environment at Cal, and I enjoyed that, and I soaked it all up. And I was working a job, from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. Loading trucks at a steel factory, do common steel to make my way, because my parents didn't have any money, make my way at school. So although you may have seen a picture of me passed out on the lawn at Cal, it wasn't from drugs, it was from just lack of sleep, But all of that was fomenting and shaping what I wanted to do. So, part of that is telling stories, part of it is to be a little rebellious, part of it is, even in the church where I was, as I started to work in the business, after a while, some of the people in the church were saying, okay, so did you get that out of your system? Are you going to get a real job?
Right.
Because there was no respect for that entertainment business, which just drove me further to go that direction.
I see.
I wanted more of that.
Yeah.
Because it was attractive, and I thought there's something that I can participate in too. So I've had a very different career. I've bounced around. I'm not tied to one director or one franchise. I left the X-Men franchise after 4 movies because we were just telling the same story over and over again. I'm not being challenged by it. I want something challenging. Now, you may not think Captain Ron's challenging. You may not think Hocus Pocus is challenging, but I did at that point in my goofy, immaturity. But I think I'm making better choices and trying to find ways to explore what I want to be when I grow up, and how I can, fulfill, what I feel like is my skill set, what I can do that's going to make me be happy about what God's given me.
Yeah, in many ways, it sounds like there was trying to figure out whether it's the chicken or the egg, kind of a thing. When you went to college, on the one hand, it sounded like you were already Berkeley matched your personality and maybe your upbringing and your family dynamics a little bit, but it also formed and shaped you in a unique way. And that's informed the kind of decisions you made in terms of even your career and things like that. What were some of the formative relationships or practices? You talked about John Perkins and spending some time volunteering and working with him.
Yeah, that was formative with John and his family. Still in touch.
Can you tell maybe some of our students, who is John Perkins?
John is a civil rights leader. He lives in Mendenhall, Mississippi. I think he's moved back there now with his family and his wife. He's in his 90s and in less than stellar health, but he has shaped a lot of policy and programs around poverty and breaking the cycle of poverty that he preaches and teaches there. He teaches all over the world and is renowned. He was beat up by the Mississippi Highway Patrol in 1969. A lot of the church that sponsored our trip were terrified that we weren't going to survive, being there in the summer of 1972. But John is an icon and a tireless worker, trying to get everyone to realize that cycle of poverty and how you break out of that. So from various centers he started around the country, and certainly there in Jackson, Mississippi and nearby. We built a gymnasium. I learned from some of these older craftsmen in laying bricks in the hot Mississippi sun, while the CHP and Highway Patrol in Mississippi driving by with their lights on, no siren, because there was a rumor that we were building an armory in Mendenhall, Mississippi. We literally lived on the other side of the tracks in John's house, his former house. And my girlfriend and I, as white kids, were not allowed in town after dark. It was too dangerous. We all went, the 6 of us went one Sunday morning to a church service in the Baptist church, and the service stopped. They thought we were lost. They didn't know who these people were. And it's just a different culture, just a completely, and that was so, impressionable on me and the young mind of what's going on and how can people treat other people that way. We played basketball until they found out we were working at the black church, and the game shifted, the game moved, the doors were locked, they didn't answer our phone. It was all the white kids. So all those things are burned in my memory, so many years ago.
And I love the way that there's this connection even between, this game that you love to play, basketball, and that led to going out and volunteering across the country, laying bricks to build a gymnasium, right? And the pressures and the cultural differences, having to navigate all that. I'm assuming that those are the types of formative experiences that have even informed your professional career.
It's about how you treat people, and I see that as a part of my faith that's again, where the rubber meets the road. It's not about getting people to say the right words in the right order for the sinner's prayer, but what matters more is how I treat people. Do I pay people a fair wage? Do I treat them with respect as a boss? Do I fire people in an honorable way? Those things speak much louder than just words that I can recite. And people come up to you afterwards and go, how do you do this? How do you, I don't understand how you can do this.
Well, on the one hand, it seems like some of those on-the-job types of decisions, they seem very mundane, everyday job decisions, but for you, that's rooted in your experience with the civil rights movement and these types of early experiences. That's fantastic. Tell me a little bit more about your faith formation in college. How did you grow up as a Christian?
Grew up in a Christian family. I accepted Christ at Green Oaks Boys Ranch when I was 12 with my Sunday school teacher. Recommitted my life in high school with a vibrant program at Glendale Presbyterian Church. We had several hundred in the high school department. And then I sort of bonded with all of those guys and gals, and we moved through, high school and college together when I was in town. And, a very caring, formative community about, challenging what does it mean to be a Christian? You know, do I take the risk and be labeled as a conscientious objector? Am I going to go through the paperwork and do that? Is that worthwhile? And all those kinds of things that you would do in college that, you know, take a little extra effort to get through. We did some evangelism. We did all the kinds of things that were popular there in the 60s and 70s. But all of that gave me a little different view about evangelism, a little different view about how we get the message out about what it is to follow Christ. And so, yeah, I've been a little rebellious. I'm not one that's gonna, the first words out of my mouth aren't going to be the right words in the right order. I'm gonna struggle to find meaningful ways to talk about how the words of Jesus in the New Testament are words of hope and good news, in a sense that it's gonna help you in the struggle and the journey, and not just provide you with a pat answer that you know you can go off and go on your way on your own.
Yeah.
And I think that's all. There's always been a struggle, and missionaries have done this in a lot of ways of trying to make the gospel message relevant to the culture. And in a weird way with movies, I'm trying to do that. I'm trying to figure out how we can make that relevant.
Yeah. And your faith survived Berkeley somehow in the early 70s.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that.
You know, I was fortunate
Yeah.
to, I attended a church, Earl Palmer's church, and Earl became a friend. He just passed away recently. He was a renowned orator and teacher. And I lived with the pastor and his wife, rented a room from them. So I was still working in the church, involved with that, trying to figure that out. How's that relevant on the Berkeley campus in Sproul Plaza? And struggle with that, but First Pres Berkeley was always sort of a respite and a place of you know, restoration. I mean, you know, rejuvenation, and kind of, you know, feel like it was a place of hope that I could be there.
So you were rooted in a church community that really kind of nourished even that side and helped you to connect the dots between your activism and your faith.
And those were all the students I was with, hanging out with Earl Palmer, 7 a.m. Bible studies, or Paul Tillich's Dogmatics and Outline that I still have with notes on it and all that, because those were formative years about that stuff.
Yeah, yeah. Now I'm guessing when you were a college student, you know, going through those experiences, film, producing, Hollywood, that wasn't in the picture quite then, right? Did you
I went to movies like anybody else, but I never thought about that. That never happened. That formed when I was at Broadway and seeing that. Then I was even when I was at Paramount in post-production, I was managing a lot of TV shows, and I really didn't see myself in that capacity. That came and grew as I was there.
Yeah.
As I saw myself helping to solve problems, a producer would come to me with a new movie of the week he's working on, and a trailer that didn't make any sense. And I said, I can recut that for you.
Yeah.
I'll come in the weekend and I'll recut it and see. And he liked it.
Yeah.
And so we built relationships, and 5 or 10 of those kinds of experiences where you're able to help solve a problem and use a skill set that you enjoy doing. It's like, well, I could do that. That'd be fun.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of what motivated it to get along and head in that direction.
Yeah. Yeah, we use a book called Designing Your Life by Bill Burnett and Dave Evans, who talk about this idea of how you find your life's purpose. And they use design thinking to kind of reverse engineer this. And they say often one of the best ways to figure out what it is that you want to do, the kind of life you want to live, is figure out what problem you're trying to solve.
Yeah.
And you'll very quickly know what you're good at, what you can solve, right? How you address it, whether you enjoy solving those kinds of problems, and something emerges there.
I'll tell you something else that, I was very involved as an elder at the church and in committees and all of that stuff. That's time I'll never get back. Oh my gosh. I don't want to ever argue about the color of the carpet or the walls ever again. But when you work in a church committee, you work with volunteers.
Yeah.
And I can't fire them. People that aren't pulling their weight, I can't get rid of them. People that are noisy or obstinate or goofy, I can't get rid of them. I have to work with them.
Yes.
And so I think that leadership in a church, in a volunteer organization, one of the toughest jobs there is. And I think that stuff prepared me for being a leader on a movie set.
Yeah.
Because yes, I have the ability now to fire people when they mouth off or they don't work or they don't perform. but that's
how
not my
you
first
lead
instinct.
them is different.
It's not my first instinct
Yeah.
because I'm used to a church environment where I've got to figure out a meaningful role for Gladys to play, whether she wants to or not, and whether I want her to or not. And that's challenging. But I think that struggle helped me, become a better leader.
So when you were a college student and you didn't quite know what was next, I mean, if somebody asked you, Ralph, what are you going to do after college? Did you have an answer? Did you have a sense of?
When I got married, people were asking me that question, and it was like, I'm going to go to graduate school, or I might teach, or I might become a pastor, go to seminary, because a lot of my buddies went to seminary, so I'm attracted to go that direction with all of them. But then I began to realize in business that I could have more influence in business, and I could always go to seminary later, as opposed to going to seminary, then trying to go to business. That didn't seem like a path that was going to work. So it just evolved as I found a way in business to be helpful, because I was making money and seminary students weren't making money, so I could help pay for something and do something that otherwise wouldn't get done. And it was like, well, I can do that. And so that sort of shaped my thinking about, I can go to seminary later, I can teach, I can still do things that fulfill that, urge. But I think I'm gonna go this direction. And then the storytelling, and then the lining up of those things. When I can line up what I love doing and what my job is, and line that up with what my faith is, then I feel like I'm doing the right thing. I'm in the right space. When those are disconnected, my job over here is not related to what my faith journey is, and so I'm confused. Where do I spend my time? So I work hard at aligning those things up. That Sunday school class I do on Academy Award, that's the perfect lineup of what that's about for me.
And is that something that needs to constantly happen? Is it a one-time thing in your 20s?
I've been doing it for 35 years. Back when there's video cassettes and it took forever to line up a clip.
And it's still a struggle. It's still, or it requires
it's not a
effort,
anymore. No.
or
it was for a while. It is not a struggle now. My only struggle now is time. And now that I'm not traveling as much, my class will be more regular at that church. And now I'm finding other things besides Academy Award Best Picture nominees that we can find alignment and usefulness for my church and other groups. But I like using the Academy Award movies because it's a little temperature stick on what's in the culture right now. And it changes and shifts every year. And I just think that's kind of fun to sort of, are we tracking? Are we as the church? Are we as Christians? Are we as followers of Christ? Are we tracking with where the culture is? And a lot of times we're not.
It's like the sons of Issachar who knew what the times were, right? And how to deliver God's word in those moments. Ralph, how do you understand your sense of calling? What does that word mean to you? How do you define the word calling? Your sense, is it purpose? Is it something else? What does calling mean to you?
In some ways, I'm sort of always looking for that. What am I going to be when I grow up? I sometimes think it might have been more fun to be an architect. It might have been more fun to be a mathematician. They're sort of hot right now with
Christopher
AI.
Nolan movies too.
Oh yeah. So
AI,
there's in some ways I think about other paths that I could have taken, and I also think I've been very privileged and honored to have these kinds of choices and make these kinds of choices. Not everybody gets the opportunity to do that. And I hold it all very lightly. It could all go away tomorrow. The job I'm in now, it's a strong New York management, and there's a lot of people that live in fear of the boss and what's going to happen, and you can get fired. And what I've said to them is, look, I've been fired a number of times in my career, and it's okay. And as a matter of fact, every time I've been fired, I've dodged a bullet. And I got away from something that became worse. And so I said, you know what happens if I get fired in this job? We throw a huge party at my house. My wife will be thrilled. And you're all invited. And I've got an adult beverage wine collection that goes back 30 years. We're going to drink it all. Because it's going to be a party, and maybe that's God's way of saying, you know, you're done with that one, on to the next.
Yeah, yeah.
So I hold it all lightly. It may not last, and it's okay. It's not meant for that.
Yeah.
And so I'm always trying to figure out, and I get this when I'm doing movies. I'm making that choice every year and a half. Should I work on this movie? Is that going to be helpful? Is that am I going to learn something about this that I don't know already? That's usually why I turn, you know, if it's not a good script and I'm not going to learn anything, I turn it down.
Yeah.
I turn down movies all the time.
Yeah. Because you're not operating out of fear.
No.
You're not having to hold on to grasp at everything that comes.
No. And I know that's harder when you're 30.
Yes.
It's easier at my age to do that. But, you know, that's a way of thinking you got to get to.
Yeah.
Is, you know, what's going to be meaningful? What's the long game? What's going to play out on the long game? That's what you got to play for. Yeah. And, you know, some things in life are like lottery tickets. You know, who cares? You may or may not. You can't live your life like that.
Yeah.
It's pointless.
Yeah, can't control what you can't control.
No.
And so.
No.
But what I like about your story here is even how getting fired, let's say, or a failure becomes the means to a redemptive story, a larger redemptive story. I mean, Daniel got fired, right? Ended up in the lion's den, right?
Literally,
And there's a sense in which that redemptive story couldn't have emerged without that failure, or emerging from the furnace and the lion's den in those ways.
And I've made choices, you know, I've made poor choices and paid the price, and I've made, you know, good choices that take time for them to play out.
Yeah.
And you have to be quiet. You have to just trust. You have to slow down. You got to think about what's out there. I made a choice, you know, when I was doing the movie Hackers in London. I had an opportunity to go to take over a Bond movie. And I told the executive at the time, hang on, I got to go talk to my wife. I can't do this on my own. And I didn't realize all the stress that was going on in her life when she was not with me in London. And, you know, it came down to that choice that if I wanted to go do the Bond movie, I'd be living at a different address when I came home.
Yes.
It was hard. I sat at home for 6-8 months praying for jobs that are significant, that I'm going to learn something. My wife's praying for every job that works 2 blocks from our house because she doesn't want me to go anywhere. And God answered that prayer for me in that way at that time with a TV show in the Valley. And the TV show was work, it was local, and it just turns out that Steven Spielberg was the executive producer. And I worked for Steven for 2 years, saw him every day.
Yeah.
I didn't know that was going to happen. How did that happen?
Yeah.
You know, so, you know.
But it took 6 to 8 months of waiting with Bond on the other side.
Yeah. Saying, oh,
right?
you could be over here.
That's right.
You could have a Star Trek movie and a James Bond movie on your.
Yeah.
Turns out that Bond movie, not the best one.
Sure.
And you know, it was all. It's all, you know, trusting and seeing what God.
And the way God honored that decision to choose your wife and your family.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. It was all about my wife.
Yeah.
And it's hard. It's painful.
Yeah.
It was painful to wait. It was painful to sit. I'm not a guy that likes to sit.
Yeah.
And but that was a growth and a useful time for me.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that we're trying to develop here in the Office of Student Success is also a sense of a kind of definition of calling that somehow thinks about the intersection between our careers and God's compassion. And at least in my own experience and some of the experiences I've seen in people who have a very dynamic sense of what they might call a calling, there is this idea that somehow they can take their careers and use it to serve others in some way. Does that experience and definition resonate with you in any way, in your experience, your professional career, how that might lead to? You've already talked about even the way that you treat the people who work for you, the way that some of these, your career is rooted in your early formation, the civil rights movement, these types of things. How might one's career and God's compassion connect in a way to help us discern our calling?
Well, a part of that, I think, is being in community with our local church.
Yeah.
And so we take that seriously, and we try to participate with Special Olympics, with, the various things that our church is doing in the community. I love this Nazarene church because it's really simple. There's a gospel message, and they're the friendliest darn people you've ever met in your life. And they don't care where I work or who I am, it doesn't matter. They just want to reach out and share the good news and help people. Yeah. And it's not even like trying to beat people over the head with a gospel message, just trying to help people. So that naturally attracts me and my wife to go help and be a part of that and cheer for those kids at Special Olympics and just make them feel worthwhile. The various mission trips, or if we can't go, to help fund some of those things. So I think it's rooted in our community. We can't do this alone. And I think the less we're connected to some kind of community, maybe it's not a formal church, maybe it's a house church. There's probably lots of forms of that stuff now. But I think we have to be connected. I have to be connected to be sure that that's being fulfilled and played out in some way.
Yeah.
I can't do it without that connection.
Yeah. That's very good. I really appreciate just even, your own story is like a good film. One that's had all these twists and turns.
Yeah.
The plot line isn't so predictable.
No.
And yet it required some courage. It required some leaps. It required some difficult decisions.
It required some failure.
And failure. That's right. And to be able to, because when somebody hears, right, your title, what you do, right, your filmography, all these things, there's probably a certain narrative that people assume about your life. And yet here we are, when we hear the story, it really is a story that I think everybody can resonate with, right? In making difficult choices. And
it's also, I don't have any family in the business.
Yeah.
I don't live in the right part of town.
Yeah.
I don't have money in my family. I don't have any of those other, advantages that a lot of people did when I was going through, and a lot of people as well now. And so I think, to me, I think that's hopeful that anybody can make it. You can do that.
Yeah.
I think it can be exciting. You can have a very good career as a grip. Now, you might have trouble working. It's a very physical job, and you may not be working much after age 60 because you're worn out and broken. But you can have a very fulfilling career doing a lot of that physical labor that goes into making a movie. And it's a young person's business.
Yeah.
There's not many guys left my age that are working there. And that's all for, there's a whole turnover that happens of young people and fresh ideas. Billie Eilish, who won the song this year on a movie, 22 years old. She's 22. That's her second Oscar.
Incredibly talented. Yeah.
It's young people that are, driving that part of the business. And, I think there's tremendous opportunity.
Yeah. Well, we have some young people who are probably watching this video, this conversation. What are some advice that you would give to them as they're navigating these decisions, thinking about what's next, how to figure out their sense of career, calling, right? What are some of the advice you would give to them?
Well, first of all, I'd say you don't have to make a decision today. You have a lot of runway. There's a lot of runway, and there's room to take turns and move and find that. You don't have to make one choice for a job for the next 40 years. You don't have to do that. I see that as a relief. That's not the way it's always been. Secondly, I think you have to find, things that you're passionate about, things that you dream about, things that keep you awake at night. Those might be things that you should be working on. Those might be things that you should be pursuing. I'd also say you can't do this on your own. I'm not saying you necessarily have to get married, but you need partners, you need friends, you need people around you that are like thinking and you're going to help and encourage each other on the path and making good choices. You can't do it on your own.
Yeah.
I think it's very, very difficult to do that. I think that image of a tortured, lonely artist is just that. It's an image that is not necessarily true. I think also, as a young person, you got plenty of room and runway to try some things out.
Yeah.
You think you want to be a pilot? Well, see if you got the stuff to go do that. You want to, I tell students at churches and Christian schools, you want to direct? Okay. Why don't you go make the stewardship video?
Yeah.
Because no one's going to tell you how to do it. You can shoot it on your iPhone, and you'll know in 5 minutes if you're effective as a director telling an emotional story that gets people to run their Visa card through the machine.
Yeah.
You'll know immediately.
Yeah.
So you want to direct? So go direct those. No one's stopping you. You can do that on the weekends.
Right. You don't have to wait for some big
No.
project all of a sudden to drop down.
And you can try all of these things to see if that works, to see if that's ringing the bell for you, and then take further steps to see if that makes sense, or further school or education or teaching, or you want to become a pastor. Well, maybe you should lead a Bible study. And can you do that effectively? Can you gather people around you? Are you useful at that? I think there's plenty of opportunity and there's room to try things. You've got plenty of runway.
Ralph, thank you so much. I think this is a great conversation and a great story that's going to inspire young people to even figure out how to tell their own stories better. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.